The stars looked close enough to touch, shimmering like frost on a winter morning. Julian Reese had never seen anything so beautiful, though he wished it were under better circumstances. The battered frigate Argent Traverse groaned with every evasive maneuver, its hull plating screaming against the strain. An explosion rocked the vessel, and Julian felt the unmistakable pull of decompression as the air grew thin. "All hands, abandon ship. I repeat, abandon ship." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ah, music to my ears," Julian muttered, his words dripping with sarcasm. He shoved a rusted maintenance drone out of the way and sprinted toward the escape pods. Around him, the crew scrambled like ants under a magnifying glass, their panic palpable. Julian was no soldier, just a technician conscripted into the galactic war like so many others. But even he could recognize a lost cause when he saw one. The escape pod bay was chaos incarnate, and Julian had to dodge a flying toolbox as he slid into the nearest available pod. He slammed the door shut and initiated launch, the pod shuddering as it detached from the frigate. Outside, the battle unfolded like a deadly ballet. Fighters darted between enormous warships, their energy weapons carving through the void in radiant arcs. Julian's pod spun out of control, the gravitational slingshot of the nearby planet pulling it into a fiery descent. "Perfect, just perfect," he grumbled, gripping the armrests as the pod's systems blared warnings at him. "I always wanted to experience re-entry as a human meteorite." The pod's heat shields held barely, and it slammed into the surface of the uncharted moon Ornyx with bone-jarring force. Julian groaned as the hatch hissed open, revealing a jungle so alien it defied comprehension. Massive trees stretched skyward, their trunks pulsating faintly as if alive. Bioluminescent vines snaked through the undergrowth, casting an eerie glow on the mist-choked air. "Well, this isn't so bad," Julian said to himself. "Just me, a hostile alien jungle, and—" A low growl interrupted him. He turned slowly to see a creature slinking toward him from the shadows. It resembled a panther, but was twice the size, its fur rippling with colors that seemed to shift and dance. "And local wildlife," Julian added, backing up cautiously. "Fantastic. Should have packed snacks." Before the beast could pounce, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The creature froze, its glowing eyes narrowing before it slunk back into the shadows. Julian blinked, his heart hammering. "Nice trick," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure to whom. "That wasn't a trick," a voice said behind him. He spun around, and there she was, the alien woman. Her violet eyes seemed to shimmer in the jungle's bioluminescent glow, and her silver hair cascaded like liquid light over her shoulders. She was tall and elegant, her presence commanding. Her voice was soft, yet carried an edge, like a blade hidden in silk. "You haven't changed at all, human," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Julian blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. Excuse me? We've met?" "Yes." "Are you sure? Because I'm pretty good with faces, and I think I'd remember—" "Yes," she interrupted, stepping closer. Julian held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. So, let's say we've met before. Any chance you can narrow it down? A decade? A star system? Maybe a karaoke bar?" She didn't laugh, but her smile widened ever so slightly. "You have no memory of me," she said, her tone laced with something he couldn't quite place. "Disappointment? Amusement?" "Well, to be fair," Julian said, gesturing around them, "I just crash-landed in the middle of an alien jungle, so my head's a little scrambled. If you've got answers, I'd love to hear them. Preferably before another one of those glow panthers decides to make me its snack." The woman tilted her head, studying him like one might study a particularly perplexing puzzle. "You haven't changed," she said again, more to herself this time. "Still hiding your fear behind humor." Julian frowned. "Hey, I don't hide my fear. I strategically disarm it. Big difference." She finally chuckled, a soft, melodic sound that made Julian feel both at ease and incredibly uneasy. "Very well, human. For now, you may call me Sareth." Julian raised an eyebrow. For now? What's that supposed to mean? You've got a list of aliases or something? Something like that. Before he could press further, the jungle around them came alive with sound. Distant screeches, guttural growls, and the rustling of enormous leaves. Sareth's expression turned serious, and she gestured for Julian to follow her. We must move. The jungle is not safe at night. Right. Because it's a utopia during the day, Julian muttered, jogging to keep up. As they navigated the dense foliage, Julian couldn't help but glance at Sareth. Her movements were graceful yet purposeful, as if she belonged here in a way he never could. And then, there were her words. You haven't changed. What did she mean by that? So, Sareth, he began, trying to lighten the mood. On a scale of 1 to I'm totally screwed, how bad is this jungle? Depends, she replied without looking back. Do you have a weapon? Just my charm and winning personality. Then you're doomed. Julian sighed. Fantastic. Glad we cleared that up. Despite the danger, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Sareth was no accident. And as much as he hated to admit it, her words had struck a chord. You haven't changed, human. The problem was, Julian wasn't sure if he wanted to know what she meant. The jungle of Orenix didn't so much sleep as it shifted into a different kind of danger after dark. The bioluminescent glow of plants and fungi deepened, casting sharp, unsettling shadows, and every sound seemed magnified. Julian found himself clinging to Sareth's lead, her confidence in this alien terrain the only thing keeping his rising panic at bay. This place is like a horror movie, Julian muttered, stepping over a gnarled root that pulsed faintly underfoot. Except instead of a chainsaw-wielding maniac, we've got glow panthers and plants that look like they want to eat me. Sareth glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. You talk a lot for someone who claims to value stealth. Talking helps me cope, Julian shot back. Besides, if we're about to get ambushed by some six-legged death machine, I'd rather be mid-joke than mid-scream. Makes for a better last impression. She didn't laugh, but Julian caught a flicker of amusement in her eyes. You were always like this, she said, almost to herself. And here we go again, Julian said, throwing up his hands. The cryptic remarks, the I know you better than you know yourself routine. You know, Sareth, if you're trying to mess with my head, it's working, but I'd really appreciate some answers. Sareth paused, turning to face him fully. The jungle seemed to hold its breath around them, the ambient noise dulling for a moment. You don't remember me, she said softly, her tone tinged with something close to regret. But I remember you, Julian. I remember what you were and what you chose to forget. Julian felt a chill crawl up his spine. Okay, first off, that's officially the most ominous thing anyone's ever said to me. Second, you're going to have to be a lot more specific, because as far as I know, I'm just a guy who fixes engines and occasionally crashes escape pods. Her gaze bore into him, her violet eyes seeming to search for something buried deep within. You were more than that, she said finally. And you still are, whether you realize it or not. Before Julian could respond, a low hum filled the air, faint but growing. Sareth's head snapped toward the sound, her posture tensing. What now? Julian asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Please tell me that's not another predator. Not a predator, Sareth said, her tone grim. Worse. The hum resolved into a mechanical whine, and moments later, a sleek, angular drone burst through the canopy, its lights scanning the forest floor. Julian ducked instinctively as it zipped overhead, narrowly missing him. Friend of yours? He quipped, though his heart was pounding. Kalar reconnaissance, Sareth said, grabbing his arm and pulling him into the shadows. If it finds us, it will alert the Dominion fleet. Julian followed her lead, crouching low behind a cluster of glowing ferns. The drone hovered nearby, its spotlight sweeping dangerously close. Why would they care about us? I mean, I'm just a nobody, and you're an exile, Sareth finished. Julian blinked. Come again? She didn't elaborate, instead gesturing for him to stay quiet as the drone passed overhead. Only when the hum faded into the distance did she relax, though her expression remained tense. "All right," Julian said, standing and brushing himself off. "I've had enough of the mysterious act. You keep dropping these little bombs. You haven't changed. You're more than you think. I'm an exile, but you're not giving me anything to work with. What's the deal, Sareth? Who are you really, and why do you care so much about me?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the ground as if debating how much to reveal. "Do you know of the Elunari?" she asked finally. Julian frowned. "Can't say it rings a bell. Sounds like a brand of overpriced energy drinks." Sareth sighed, though there was a trace of a smile on her lips. "The Elunari were a race older than your kind, older than the Kylar. They were scholars, explorers, creators. They believed in unity between species, in bridging the gaps that divide us." "Sounds like a lovely bunch," Julian said. "What happened to them?" "They vanished," Sareth said, her voice dropping. "Or so the galaxy believes, but their legacy remains hidden in fragments scattered across the stars." Julian tilted his head. "And what does that have to do with me?" Sareth stepped closer, her expression earnest. "Because, Julian, you were part of that legacy. You once believed in their ideals, fought for them, and then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, you chose to abandon it all." He stared at her, searching her face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, but she was deadly serious. "Okay," Julian said slowly. "Let's say, for argument's sake, that what you're saying is true. Why don't I remember any of this? Wouldn't I don't know, have some inkling that I used to be an intergalactic peacekeeper or whatever?" Sareth's expression hardened. "Because your memories were taken from you. By choice or by force, I don't know. But the Julian I knew—" She faltered, her voice catching. "The Julian I knew wouldn't have given up without a reason." Julian let out a shaky laugh, trying to process her words. "This is insane," he said. "You expect me to believe I was some kind of galactic do-gooder and then just, hit the reset button on my life?" "I don't expect you to believe me," Sareth said, "but I do expect you to help me, because whether you remember it or not, you have a part to play in this war, and in ending it." Julian rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Great, no pressure or anything." The jungle around them seemed to close in as Sareth's words hung in the air. Julian didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer his own. "Well," he said finally, forcing a smile, "if I'm going to be dragged into some galaxy-shattering conspiracy, I'm going to need coffee. Lots of it. Think we can find a space Starbucks around here?" Sareth actually laughed at that, a soft, melodic sound that momentarily eased the weight of her revelations. "I'll see what I can do," she said, her smile faint but genuine. For the first time since crash landing on Orenix, Julian felt a glimmer of hope, albeit a sarcastic, coffee-fueled one. The next morning, or what Julian assumed was morning, given the bioluminescent jungle's perpetual twilight, he awoke to the sound of Sareth arguing with a piece of technology. "I said calibrate, not override," she muttered, crouched over a sleek circular device that emitted a soft hum. It resembled a cross between a satellite dish and a very stylish waffle iron. "Morning, sunshine," Julian said, rubbing his eyes. "Who's winning?" "You or the gadget?" Sareth shot him a look, one that balanced between amusement and exasperation. "If you're rested enough to make jokes, you're rested enough to help. Come here." Julian stumbled over, stifling a yawn. What exactly is this thing? Some kind of alien waffle maker? Because if you're hiding syrup somewhere, I'm officially forgiving you for the whole cryptic revelations about my past thing. "It's a memory shard projector," Sareth replied, not looking up. Julian paused. That was not the answer I was expecting. She glanced at him, her violet eyes gleaming in the faint light. "If I'm correct, This device might help recover fragments of your memories. Julian blinked, his humor faltering. Wait, you're serious? You think this thing can bring back what I've forgotten? Possibly, Sareth said, her tone measured. If it's still functional after being salvaged from a Dominion outpost, that is. Julian squatted beside her, staring at the device as if it might bite him. And what happens if it works? Am I just going to get flooded with visions of my alleged heroic past? Sareth's expression softened. Not all at once. The shard will show glimpses, moments tied to strong emotions or significant events. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Julian leaned back, exhaling. All right, let's do it. But if I start spouting poetry or weeping uncontrollably, you have my permission to slap me. I'll keep that in mind, Sareth said dryly. She activated the device, and it hummed to life, projecting a shimmering sphere of light into the air. The glow pulsed, and for a moment, Julian felt an odd tug in his chest, as if something buried deep inside him was being unearthed. The first image flickered into view, a vast chamber filled with towering pillars that seemed to hum with energy. Alien figures moved with purpose, their forms ethereal and shimmering, as if they were made of liquid light. At the center of the chamber stood a younger version of Julian, his hair slightly longer, his expression intense. He was arguing with someone, though the words were muted, lost in the haze of memory. Whoa, Julian whispered, his breath catching. Is that me? Yes, Sareth said softly. And that is an Elunari council chamber. The scene shifted. Julian saw himself piloting a sleek starship through a nebula, its glowing tendrils wrapping around the vessel like a living thing. He laughed as he maneuvered the ship with precision, a grin of pure joy lighting up his face. That can't be right, Julian said, shaking his head. I can barely parallel park, let alone fly something like that. Sareth chuckled. It seems you were quite skilled. Perhaps muscle memory will come back to you. The next fragment was darker. Julian saw himself in the ruins of a city, flames licking at the edges of a shattered skyline. He was holding a device, something intricate and alien, its surface pulsing with light. He was shouting at someone, his expression desperate, but again the words were lost. What was that? Julian asked, his voice trembling. A memory tied to conflict, Sareth said, her tone grave. The Elunari's ideals often put them at odds with others. Perhaps this was one such moment. The images faded, and the sphere of light dimmed until it vanished. The jungle's ambient noise returned, grounding Julian in the present. That was a lot, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. It's only the beginning, Sareth said, but it proves you were connected to the Elunari. Your memories are still there, waiting to be unlocked. Julian let out a nervous laugh. Great. So not only am I a technician with no idea how to survive a jungle, but I'm also a former space diplomat or warrior or whatever. No pressure. Sareth smiled faintly. You're handling this better than I expected. Yeah, well, I cope with sarcasm and coffee, and we're fresh out of coffee, Julian said. So sarcasm it is. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden rustling in the foliage. Julian froze, his hand instinctively going to his hip, where his multi-tool was holstered. Please tell me that's the wind, he whispered. Sareth didn't answer. Instead, she rose smoothly to her feet, her gaze fixed on the undergrowth. Stay behind me, she said. The rustling grew louder, and a moment later, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien, their skin a mottled gray and their eyes glowing faintly. They carried weapons, sleek and lethal-looking. Kalar scouts, Sareth murmured, her voice tense. Fantastic, Julian muttered. We just love making friends, don't we? The lead scout barked something in a harsh, guttural language, pointing its weapon at them. Sareth responded in kind, her tone sharp and commanding. What are you saying? Julian hissed. I'm convincing them not to shoot us, Sareth said without looking at him. Julian raised an eyebrow. And how's that going? Not well. The tension was broken by the high-pitched whine of an energy weapon charging. Julian's stomach dropped. Okay, new plan, running? Before Sareth could reply, the scout suddenly froze, its weapon lowering. It stared at Julian, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it recognized him. What's happening? Julian asked, glancing between the scout and Sareth. I don't know, Sareth admitted, her voice tinged with surprise. The scout barked another command, and the others lowered their weapons as well. They stepped aside, leaving a clear path through the jungle. Well, that's unexpected, Julian said, his voice shaky. Did I just accidentally become their best friend? Sareth's gaze was fixed on the lead scout, her expression thoughtful. No, she said. They've seen you before, or at least they think they have. Julian frowned. Great. More mysteries. Just what I needed. As they cautiously moved past the scouts, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that his past was catching up to him faster than he was ready for. And whatever it held, it was bigger than he'd ever imagined. The jungle thinned as Julian and Sareth made their way into a clearing, the bioluminescent glow of the flora giving way to the shimmering light of an alien night sky. Above them, the heavens seemed alive, a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and constellations Julian had never seen before. So, Julian said, breaking the silence, I either just scared off a bunch of scary alien soldiers by sheer charm, or there's something really off about my face. Charm isn't the word I'd use, Sareth replied, her lips twitching in a suppressed smile. Harsh, Julian said, placing a hand over his chest in mock offense. I'll have you know, I was voted most likely to diffuse tension in my high school yearbook. Granted, it was mostly by making bad jokes, but still. Sareth shook her head, but her amusement was evident. You've always had a talent for finding humor in the direst of circumstances. Always, huh? Julian said, raising an eyebrow. You sure you're not just romanticizing whatever version of me you used to know? Her smile faded slightly, and Julian instantly regretted his words. Sorry, he said quickly. That came out wrong. Look, if you're keeping secrets for a reason, I get it. But this whole thing is like trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the picture's supposed to be. And I'm pretty sure half the pieces are still in the box. Sareth's expression softened, and she gestured toward a fallen log. Let's sit, she said. There's something you need to know. Julian followed her, brushing off a layer of glowing moss before sitting. This isn't going to be another cryptic revelation, is it? Because my brain's starting to max out on those. No cryptic revelations, Sareth said. Just a story. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The Elunari believed in unity, as I've told you. They saw potential in the galaxy's diverse species and sought to bring them together. But not everyone shared their vision. The Kalar Dominion, for one, saw them as a threat. To the Dominion, strength comes from domination, not collaboration. Sounds like a delightful bunch, Julian said, though his voice lacked its usual levity. The war began long before you and I were born, Sareth continued. But it wasn't always open conflict. There were alliances, betrayals, and countless attempts at peace. The Elunari hoped to resolve things diplomatically, but the Dominion was relentless. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. And where did I fit into all this? Sareth hesitated, as if weighing her words. You were a bridge between worlds, a human chosen by the Elunari to act as their envoy to your kind. You were idealistic, passionate, and stubborn, and you were remarkable. Julian blinked, caught off guard by the raw emotion in her voice. Remarkable, huh? You sure you're not confusing me with someone else? Because the version of me I know is mostly remarkable at burning toast. Sareth laughed softly, and for a moment the tension between them eased. Maybe you haven't changed as much as I thought, she said, her tone lighter. See, I'm consistent if nothing else, Julian said with a grin. But seriously, why would I give all that up? If I was this amazing bridge builder, why would I walk away? That's what I don't understand, Sareth admitted. You disappeared after the fall of Neonis Prime, a pivotal battle in the war. When you returned, you were different. You refused to speak of what happened and eventually vanished altogether. Julian frowned. Neonis Prime? Doesn't ring a bell. But if I disappeared after some big battle, there had to be a reason, right? Perhaps, Sareth said, but without your memories, we can only guess. Before Julian could respond, a low rumble echoed through the clearing. The ground beneath them trembled, and a series of lights flickered in the distance. Okay, Julian said, standing abruptly. Please tell me that's not the planet deciding it's had enough of us. Sareth was already on her feet, her gaze fixed on the source of the disturbance. Not the planet, she said grimly. A Kalar dropship. Julian groaned. Of course it is, because why wouldn't we have more uninvited guests? The ship descended, its sleek, metallic hull gleaming in the starlight. It landed with a hiss of steam, and a ramp extended from its side. We need to move, Sareth said, grabbing Julian's arm. Wait, Julian said, pulling back. What if they're not here to kill us? I mean, they didn't shoot us last time, right? Maybe they just want to talk. Sareth gave him a look that could have frozen a star. The Kalar Dominion doesn't negotiate. Fair point, Julian said. Running it is. They darted into the jungle, the underbrush crunching beneath their boots. Behind them, the sound of Kalar soldiers disembarking grew louder. Remind me to thank them for the cardio, Julian panted, dodging a low-hanging branch. Nothing like a good chase to start the day. Focus, Sareth said, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. They reached a rocky outcrop, and Sareth pulled Julian behind a cluster of boulders. She activated a device on her wrist, and a shimmering field of light enveloped them. Is this some kind of cloaking shield? Julian asked, his voice hushed. Yes, Sareth said, but it won't hold if they get too close. Great, Julian said. So we're basically hiding under a high-tech blanket and hoping for the best. Love that for us. The Kalar soldiers spread out, their glowing eyes scanning the area. One of them approached the outcrop, and Julian held his breath, his heart pounding. Just when it seemed the soldier might discover their hiding spot, a loud screech echoed through the jungle. A massive bird-like creature burst from the foliage, its wingspan easily 10 feet wide. It swooped down on the soldiers, its talons gleaming. Well, Julian whispered, that's one way to make an entrance. The soldiers fired at the creature, their weapons lighting up the night, but it was too quick, darting through the trees with predatory grace. Now's our chance, Sareth said, deactivating the shield. They slipped away, the sounds of the skirmish fading behind them. As they reached a safer distance, Julian couldn't help but laugh, though it was tinged with exhaustion. You know, I'm starting to think the universe has a weird sense of humor. First, I'm a secret space diplomat, and now I'm playing hide-and-seek with alien soldiers and giant birds. What's next? A cosmic talent show? Sareth smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. If it comes to that, I hope you're ready to perform. Julian chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, I'm ready. Just don't expect me to juggle. Despite the danger, the moment felt lighter, a brief reprieve in their chaotic journey. But as they pressed on, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come, and that the answers he sought might be more than he was prepared to face. The jungle's endless tapestry gave way to a cliffside path, the rock beneath Julian's boots, a welcome reprieve from the perpetual tangle of roots and glowing moss. Below, an iridescent river snaked through the valley, its surface reflecting the chaotic beauty of the alien night sky. So, Julian began, glancing at Sareth, assuming we're not interrupted by any more giant birds, killer robots, or alien soldiers, do we have an actual plan? Or are we just winging it? Sareth gave him a sideways glance, her expression caught between amusement and exasperation. We're heading to an old Elunari outpost. If it's still intact, it might contain records that can explain why the Kalar recognize you, and why you don't remember them. Julian nodded. Cool, cool. And if it's not intact? Then we improvise, she said simply. Fantastic, Julian said, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. Nothing like improvisation in the middle of an intergalactic identity crisis. The path narrowed as they climbed, the air growing cooler. Julian's legs burned with the effort, and he found himself wondering if his supposed past self had been this out of shape. "You know," he said between breaths, "I'm starting to think my old self must have been part mountain goat, because this is ridiculous." Sareth smirked. "You've been complaining for the last 20 minutes. It's almost comforting. At least some things haven't changed." Julian grinned despite himself. "Glad to know my whining is a cornerstone of my personality." They crested the ridge, and Julian's complaints died in his throat. Before them lay a vast plateau, the ruins of an ancient structure sprawling across its surface. The outpost's architecture was breathtaking, a blend of organic curves and crystalline spires that seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly energy. "Okay," Julian said, his voice soft with awe. "I'll admit it, this is way cooler than I expected." Sareth led the way toward the ruins, her steps confident despite the uneven terrain. "The Elunari believed their structures should harmonize with their surroundings," she said. "This outpost was once a hub of knowledge and communication. If we're lucky, its core systems are still operational." Julian followed her, trying not to trip over the occasional piece of rubble. "And by lucky, you mean that the Kalar haven't scavenged it," she said. "Right," Julian said, "because things have been going so smoothly for us so far." They reached the main entrance, a massive archway etched with intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Sareth placed her hand on a panel beside the door, and a soft chime echoed through the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the doors slid open, revealing a cavernous interior bathed in pale blue light. "Welcome to the archives," Sareth said, her voice tinged with reverence. Julian stepped inside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight. Rows of crystalline consoles lined the walls, their surfaces flickering with alien script. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing rotating star maps and streams of data. "This is incredible," he said. "It's like walking into the brain of a super-intelligent disco ball." Sareth chuckled, though her focus remained on the consoles. "Let's see if we can access the memory archives. If the system recognizes you, it might grant us access to restricted files." "No pressure," Julian said, trying to sound casual. Sareth activated a nearby console, its crystalline surface lighting up beneath her touch. Alien text scrolled across the display, and she navigated it with practiced ease. "Place your hand here," she said, gesturing to a glowing panel. Julian hesitated. "You're sure this won't, fry my brain or something?" Sareth gave him a look. "You're more likely to fry it with your terrible jokes." "Fair enough," Julian said, placing his hand on the panel. The console emitted a soft hum, and Julian felt a strange warmth spread through his palm. A series of symbols appeared on the display, followed by a melodic chime. "Identity confirmed," a smooth, synthetic voice said. "Well, that's not ominous," Julian muttered. Sareth's fingers flew across the console, and a holographic projection appeared before them. It showed a younger Julian standing in a room much like this one, surrounded by figures who looked distinctly Elunari. "That's you," Sareth said, her voice soft. Julian stared at the projection, his heart pounding. I don't remember this." The projection shifted, showing Julian speaking animatedly to the others. Though the words were muted, his passion was clear. He pointed to a star map, then to a device on the table, a sleek cylindrical object that pulsed with light. "What's that?" Julian asked, gesturing to the device. Sareth's expression darkened. "A unity shard. It's a powerful tool the Elunari developed to bridge consciousnesses, to share thoughts and emotions directly. It was meant to foster understanding between species." Julian frowned. "Sounds a bit invasive." "It was controversial," Sareth admitted, "but it worked. The shard allowed the Elunari to form alliances that would have been impossible otherwise." The projection changed again, this time showing Julian in the midst of chaos, The room was ablaze, and the figures around him were shouting. Julian grabbed the Unity shard, his expression one of grim determination, and fled the scene. "Well," Julian said, his voice tight, "that's unsettling." Sareth stared at the projection, her jaw clenched. "The fall of Neonis Prime," she said. "You were there, and you took the shard." Julian shook his head. "I don't remember any of this. Why would I take it? What happened to it?" "I don't know," Sareth said, her tone heavy. "But if the Kalar believe you still have it, that would explain why they're after you." "Great," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "So not only am I a wanted man, but I might also be the galaxy's most incompetent thief." Before Sareth could respond, the room's lights flickered, and a loud alarm blared. "What now?" Julian groaned. Sareth's eyes narrowed. "The Kalar. They found us." "Of course they have," Julian said, "because why wouldn't they crash our little memory party?" Sareth grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a hidden passage. "Come on, we need to get out of here." As they ran, Julian couldn't help but glance back at the projection, the image of his younger self frozen in a moment of defiance. Whatever had happened on Neonis Prime, it had left scars deeper than he could have imagined, and the answers were still just out of reach. The hidden passage was narrow and dimly lit, its walls pulsing faintly as if alive. Julian trailed behind Sareth, his breath echoing loudly in the confined space. "Not that I'm complaining," he panted, "but does every Illuminari building come with a secret escape tunnel? Because if so, I'm starting to respect their foresight." Sareth glanced back, her expression caught between amusement and urgency. "Many structures do, though I doubt they intended them to be used quite this frequently." "Right," Julian said, "because being chased by hostile aliens is totally a one-off event." The passage widened abruptly, opening into a circular chamber. The walls were lined with crystalline panels, their surfaces etched with alien symbols that glowed faintly. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it rested a device that seemed to hum with latent energy. "Okay," Julian said, eyeing the pedestal warily. "I know I'm not the expert here, but that thing is giving off some serious Indiana Jones vibes. Are we sure it's not booby-trapped?" "It's a beacon," Sareth explained, stepping forward. "An Illuminari failsafe. If activated, it can disrupt the Kalar's communication network in this sector, buying us time." Julian crossed his arms. "You're telling me this handy little gadget has been sitting here the whole time, and no one thought to use it before now?" "The outpost was abandoned after the fall of Neonis Prime," Sareth said, her tone clipped. "The Illuminari didn't have the resources to secure it." "Fair enough," Julian said, stepping closer. "So what's the plan? Push a button and hope for the best?" "Not quite," Sareth said, her fingers dancing over the pedestal's interface. The symbols shifted and pulsed beneath her touch, the room filling with a low, resonant hum. Julian watched, his curiosity outweighing his nerves. "You know, for a secret failsafe, this thing is surprisingly user-friendly." Sareth smirked. "You'd be surprised how much of Illuminari technology relies on intuition. It's designed to respond to intent." "Intent, huh?" Julian said. "Good thing I'm not the one in charge. My intent usually involves breakfast and avoiding responsibility." The pedestal emitted a soft chime, and the beacon began to glow. Sareth stepped back, her expression tense. "It's done," she said. "The signal will disrupt their systems for a few hours, but we need to move. They'll know we're here." Julian nodded, his humor momentarily subdued. "Lead the way." They exited the chamber through another passage, the walls shimmering faintly as they moved. Julian couldn't help but glance back, a sense of unease prickling at the edges of his mind. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "Feel what?" Sareth said, not breaking stride. "I don't know," Julian said, frowning. "It's like something's watching us." Sareth slowed, her gaze sharp. "The outpost is abandoned. There shouldn't be anything here." "Great," Julian muttered, "because that's exactly what someone says right before they get eaten by a space ghost." Before Sareth could respond, the air around them seemed to ripple, and a low melodic hum filled the passage. Julian froze, his heart racing. What the? A figure materialized before them, its form shifting and translucent. It resembled an Illuminari, but its features were indistinct, as if it were made of light and mist. "Okay," Julian said, his voice high-pitched. "This is officially above my pay grade." The figure tilted its head, its voice resonating like a chorus. "Traveler, you have returned." Julian blinked. Thanks? I think? Not sure if I'm the traveler you're looking for, though." The figure stepped closer, its gaze, or what passed for it, fixed on Julian. "You carry the shard's imprint. Its echoes linger within you." Julian glanced at Sareth, who looked equally stunned. "Care to translate?" he whispered. "The Unity Shard," Sareth said slowly. "It must have left an imprint on your mind when you used it." "Used it?" Julian said, his voice rising. "I don't even remember touching the thing, let alone using it." The figure raised a hand, and a wave of light washed over Julian. Images flickered in his mind, fragments of a memory he couldn't fully grasp. He saw himself holding the shard, its light enveloping him as voices and emotions flooded his consciousness. "You sought to protect," the figure said, "to unite, but the shard's burden is great, and its cost cannot be undone." Julian staggered, his head spinning. "What cost? What are you talking about?" The figure's form wavered, its light dimming. "The shard's truth lies within. Seek it, and you may find what was lost." With that, the figure dissolved into mist, leaving Julian and Sareth alone in the passage. "Well," Julian said after a long silence, "that was deeply unsettling." Sareth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right?" Julian shook his head, trying to clear the lingering fog of the vision. "Not even a little, but hey, at least now I know I've been carrying around some cosmic baggage. That's fun." Sareth's expression softened, and she managed a small smile. "You're handling this better than I expected." "Trust me," Julian said. "Internally I'm screaming, but externally I'm going for cool under pressure. How's it working?" "Passable," Sareth said, her smile widening slightly. They continued down the passage, the tension between them easing as Julian's humor returned. "So," he said, glancing at her, "any idea where we're going next?" "Because I'm pretty sure I just got cryptically invited to some kind of existential therapy session." Sareth laughed softly. "If the shard's imprint is guiding you, we may not have much choice but to follow its lead." "Great," Julian said, rolling his eyes. "I always wanted to be a cosmic tour guide for my own subconscious." Despite his jokes, a part of him couldn't shake the figure's words, or the flickering memories they'd stirred. Whatever the shard had done to him, it was clear that his past wasn't as distant as he'd thought, and that the answers he sought might be closer than he realized. The stars above them shimmered like scattered jewels, their brilliance uninterrupted by clouds or atmosphere. Julian stood at the edge of the ridge, the Unity Shard nestled in his palm, glowing faintly with a pulsing rhythm that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat. "So this is it," he said, his voice echoing softly in the stillness. "The grand finale, the climactic moment where I figure out who I am, save the galaxy, and hopefully get some answers that don't involve cryptic glowing space ghosts." Sareth stepped beside him, her gaze steady. "The shard has brought us here for a reason. Whatever you do next, it must be your choice." Julian glanced at her. "You mean our choice, right? I'm not exactly a solo act here. You've been the brains of this operation from the start." She tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Brains, perhaps, but you're the heart, and this is something only you can do," Julian snorted. "Heart, huh? Pretty sure that's just a polite way of saying I talk too much." Sareth's smile widened. "I'd never say it to your face." Julian laughed, the sound cutting through the tension like a ray of light. But his humor faded as he looked back at the shard, its glow intensifying. Memories, fragmented and fleeting, continued to flicker at the edges of his mind. The faces of the Elunari he had stood beside, the desperate urgency in his younger self's eyes as he'd fled with the shard, the overwhelming emotions the device had unleashed. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this before I overthink it and decide to run for the hills." The shard seemed to respond to his words, its glow spreading to encompass his hand. The warmth wasn't unpleasant, but it carried a weight that settled in his chest. As Julian closed his eyes, he felt a pull, a connection forming between him and the device, stretching out across the stars. And then the visions began. He was no longer standing on the ridge, but inside the grand halls of Neonis Prime. The crystalline architecture shimmered with life, and the air buzzed with the energy of the Elunari gathered within. At the center of the room stood Julian, his younger self. He looked different, not just physically but in his demeanor. There was a confidence, a determination in his stance that Julian barely recognized. "You're sure about this?" a voice asked. It was Sareth, her younger self, standing beside him, her expression tinged with worry. "We don't have a choice," younger Julian replied. "If we don't act now, the Kalar will destroy everything we've worked for." Sareth frowned. "But the shard, its power is untested. It could—" "I know," younger Julian said, cutting her off gently. "But if there's even a chance it can unite the factions, it's worth the risk. The galaxy's falling apart, Sareth. Someone has to try to hold it together." The scene shifted, dissolving into chaos. Flames engulfed the hall, and the sounds of battle echoed through the air. Julian watched as his younger self activated the shard, its light bursting forth and enveloping the room. For a brief moment, the warring factions seemed to pause, their movements stilled by the shard's influence. But then the light faltered, the connection broke, and everything unraveled. Julian gasped as the vision ended, his knees hitting the rocky ground of the ridge. He clutched the shard tightly, its glow dimming as if exhausted by the memories it had revealed. "Julian?" Sareth's voice was soft but urgent. She knelt beside him, her eyes searching his face. "I remember," he said, his voice hoarse. "I remember it all. I thought I could fix everything, bring everyone together. But I failed. The shard, it wasn't enough." Sareth placed a hand on his shoulder. "You tried. That matters." "Does it?" Julian asked, his gaze distant. "All those lives lost, all those people I let down. How does trying make any of that better?" "It doesn't erase the pain," Sareth said gently, "but it proves that you cared, that you were willing to fight for something bigger than yourself. That's what makes you human, Julian, your ability to hope even when the odds are against you." Julian met her eyes, the weight of her words settling over him. Slowly he stood, the shard still clutched in his hand. "What happens if I activate it again?" he asked. Sareth hesitated. "It could work, or it could burn out completely. The shard's power isn't infinite, and it's already been pushed to its limits." Julian nodded. "Sounds about right. Nothing worth doing is ever easy, huh?" Sareth smiled faintly. "Not in my experience." Taking a deep breath, Julian raised the shard. Its glow intensified, casting long shadows across the ridge. He focused on the connections he'd seen in the vision, the threads of unity the shard had tried to forge. "Okay, shard," he murmured. "Round 2. Let's see if we can get it right this time." The shard's light burst forth, enveloping Julian and Sareth in its glow. Julian felt the familiar surge of emotions, hope, fear, love, anger, all swirling together in a kaleidoscope of sensations. But this time, he didn't fight it. He embraced it. The shard's power spread outward, its light cutting through the darkness of the galaxy. Julian could feel it reaching the Kalar fleet, disrupting their systems and halting their advance. But more than that, he felt the connections forming, the spark of understanding igniting in the hearts of those it touched, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Julian felt whole. When the light faded, The shard was gone, its energy spent. Julian stood on the ridge, his chest heaving as he tried to process what had just happened. "You did it," Sareth said, her voice filled with quiet awe. Julian managed a weak smile. "Not bad for a guy who couldn't remember his own past an hour ago." Sareth laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You're still you, Julian, and that's enough." As they stood together, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. The weight of the galaxy's struggles momentarily lifted. Julian didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. After all, he thought with a wry grin, someone has to keep cracking jokes in the face of cosmic doom.